I remember the sound the world made when it broke. It was not a bang, but a deep, final thud that came from everywhere at once, a sound that vibrated up through the soles of my shoes and into the bones of my skull. Then came a profound silence, a quiet so complete it felt like a pressure against my ears, and in that silence I could hear my own heart beating. The car alarm started a second later, a wave of shrieks rising from 45 floors below, and they were followed by the sound of grinding metal and a chorus of shattering glass. That was the moment every system I had mastered ceased to exist, and I became nothing more than a woman shackled to her enemy. The day had started with the familiar weight of control. I stood in my office, the city of Chicago, a grid of predictable movement beyond the glass walls. My desk was black lacquer, its surface a perfect reflection, holding only a single file and a monitor displaying the Wallace deposition. I tapped the crystal face of the watch on my wrist. It was an automatic, a gift from my father, a self-sufficient system of gears and springs that required no battery, only my own movement to power it. He told me it was tougher than a crowbar, and I believed him. I operated the same way, with a self-contained efficiency that had made me the most feared divorce attorney in the city. The city was a machine, and I knew how to work its levers better than anyone. Later, in Judge McKinley's courtroom, the air was thick with the stagnant hostility of a 2-year legal war. The judge looked down from his bench, his face a collapsed map of weariness. "You two seem to believe the law is a weapon for you to wield against each other," he said, his voice gravelly, his eyes moving between me and Felipe Pallavi. "Remember that every chain has two ends. Be careful what you bind yourself to." Felipe offered the judge a small, charming smile that never reached his eyes. I remained perfectly still, my expression unreadable. His words were just noise, the kind of judicial fluff you ignore on the way to the kill. Victory was the only thing that mattered. The final hearing was a formality. I had Felipe outmaneuvered with a mountain of evidence, each piece meticulously documented and cross-referenced. He knew it, so he did not attack my case. He attacked me. He rose, his expensive Italian suit somehow looking casual, and he directed his words past my client and straight into my history. "Your father tried to build something outside their system, and they crushed him for it," Felipe said, his voice calm, conversational. "Now he's hiding in a hole in Wyoming. And you? You ran right into the belly of the beast, thinking you could tame it." The words were inadmissible, a flagrant violation of procedure, but their purpose was not legal, it was surgical. He was referencing my family's agricultural business, a venture ruined by lawsuits from a corporate competitor that bled my father dry, the same way my mother had been bled dry in her divorce. She had trusted a charismatic man, and he had used the system she did not understand to leave her with nothing. I had built my entire life on the promise that I would never be her. I would be the predator, not the prey. The judge saw my face and banged his gavel. He called a recess. For the first time in my professional life, the mask of cold calculation shattered, and all that was left was pure, incandescent rage. I found Felipe in the hallway, leaning against the wall as if he did not have a care in the world. "Hit a nerve?" he asked, that smile playing on his lips again. "I guess some fine print runs in the family." I moved without thinking, a lunge fueled by years of repressed fury. A bailiff stepped between us, grabbing my arm. The door to the judge's chambers flew open and McKinley stood there, his face dark with thunder. "You two have been legally attached at the hip for 2 years, poisoning my courtroom," he roared, his voice echoing in the marble hall. "Let's make it literal." He pointed a trembling finger at us. "Hold them both in contempt. Cuff them to each other. I want them to think about professional conduct on their way to the holding cells." The bailiff was apologetic but firm. He took my right wrist and Felipe's left and locked a single pair of steel cuffs around them. The metal was cold against my skin. It was 11:20 a.m. As the bailiff began to lead us down the hall, the lights flickered once, then died. The world went silent, then it screamed. The courthouse plunged into a thick, disorienting darkness. People panicked, shoving blindly towards the exits. The bailiff was slammed against a wall, the impact tearing his duty belt from his waist. I heard the clatter of his equipment, the taser, the spare cuffs, the small ring of keys, all of it scattering across the floor to be kicked away and lost under the feet of the stampeding mob. Felipe pulled me hard, dragging me with the human tide into a small side office. The door slammed shut behind us, and we were trapped in the dark together. "We have to wait," I said, my voice tight. "We stay here. We find a defensible position, and we wait for order to be restored." "Order?" Felipe's voice was a low laugh in the darkness. "Order just ended. That was the sound of the rules disappearing. Our only chance is to get out of this building and onto the street right now. The street is chaos. The system will reboot. The authorities will have a contingency. You are the contingency, Vipa. You and me. There is no system anymore." The argument was pointless, a battle of obsolete philosophies. He pulled me toward the window, the cold steel of the cuff digging into my wrist. We could see the city below. The first fires were blooming against the gray buildings. A crowd of people shattered the front window of a department store and began pouring inside. My belief in established protocols, in the predictable function of the world, was dissolving as I watched the city tear itself apart. Felipe's cynical worldview was being proven right with every scream and every new plume of smoke. We were not just trapped by the cuffs, we were trapped by the sudden and total collapse of everything. The sounds of violence were getting closer, echoing up the stairwells of the courthouse. The building was a tomb, and staying was no longer an option. We needed a plan, and we needed supplies. "My office building," I said, the words tasting like defeat. 6 blocks from here. I have a bag. Emergency supplies, water filter, everything we need for 72 hours. My contingency plan, something I had always considered a rational preparation for an irrational event, was now our only hope. Felipe was silent for a moment, then I felt the chain between us tighten as he nodded in the dark. "All right, planner," he said. "You lead the way." We left the relative safety of the office, stepping out of the courthouse and into the unfiltered chaos of the street. It was our first joint decision, an alliance not of trust, but of absolute necessity. We were a 2-person chain gang, and the world we knew was gone. The chain between our wrists was a third party in every decision, a constant, grinding argument made of iron. Moving through the canyons of downtown Chicago was a clumsy humiliation. I would step over a shattered display window, and the cuff would bite into my skin because Felipe had stopped to look at his reflection in a remaining shard of glass. He would try to take a shortcut through a rubble-choked alley, and the chain would go taut, pulling me off balance. My instinct was to move methodically along the edges, using the building walls for cover, but his instinct was to walk down the middle of the street like he still owned it. We were arguing about this, the chain pulling tight between us near an intersection blocked by a burned-out bus, when 3 men detached themselves from the shadows of a bank entrance. They were thin, and their eyes were hollow with the kind of hunger that erases everything but need. Felipe immediately straightened his ruined suit jacket and flashed the smile that had disarmed 100 juries. "Gentlemen, a difficult day for everyone." One of them held a length of pipe, and he took a step forward, ignoring Felipe's words. My mind was not on their faces, but on the environment. I saw the fire escape on the building to our left. It was old, rusted, and the bottom ladder was retracted 10 feet off the ground, but its anchoring bolts on the 3rd-floor landing looked corroded. The weight of 2 people might be enough. Leverage. Felipe was still talking, his voice smooth and reasonable, when the man with the pipe lunged. "Left now," I said, pulling hard on the chain. Felipe stumbled but followed, his charm evaporating into pure reflex. We scrambled up the side of a wrecked taxi and I pointed. "The landing. We have to jump for it together." He didn't question it. We backed up to the edge of the taxi's roof, and on my count of 3 we leaped. The chain kept us in sync, and our combined weight hit the rusted metal platform with a groaning shriek. The bolts tore from the brickwork and the entire structure sagged violently, but it held. Below, the men stared up, unwilling to follow. We had a new dynamic. I would find the weaknesses in the world, and he would deal with the people in it. My office on the 62nd floor was a monument to my control, but someone had violated it. The door was splintered. The glass wall overlooking the lake was shattered. and my files were scattered like dead leaves. The go bag I had kept in a locked compartment beneath the floorboards was gone. My entire contingency plan, every carefully prepared item, had vanished. I stood there, the torn sleeve of my bespoke suit flapping in the wind from the broken window, and felt a cold hollowness spread through my chest. Years of planning had failed at the first step. Felipe said nothing. He walked over to the break room vending machine, pulled his platinum card from his wallet, and began working it into the seam of the machine's door. After a minute of gentle pressure and a sudden jerk, the lock clicked open. He pulled out 2 bags of potato chips and a bottle of water, then tossed me a bag. He had produced resources from nothing, while my meticulous preparation had yielded only air. I ate the stale chips and felt the balance of power between us shift. We joined the river of people flowing west out of the city. The highways were parking lots of silent cars, some with their doors hanging open, some with bodies inside. We walked on the shoulder, a single organism with 4 legs and 2 minds, bound by a foot of steel chain. We learned to anticipate each other's rhythm, a slight dip in my shoulder signaling a stumble, a subtle pull from him indicating a change in pace. The journey became a physical negotiation. That night, huddled in the shell of an overturned minivan, I waited until his breathing was deep and even. I took out the life straw filter I had found in my ransacked desk drawer and a small bottle I had filled from a stagnant pool. I drank carefully, quietly, preserving the clean water from the vending machine for myself. Self-preservation was the only rational law. As I capped the bottle, his eyes opened in the darkness. He had been awake the entire time. He did not say a word. He just watched me, and I knew he had filed that piece of information away. It was leverage he could use later. Days bled into one another until we walked into a town that was different. It was clean. There were no bodies in the street. An electric humming sound filled the air, coming from a large power substation on a hill overlooking the town. Men in gray coveralls with a familiar blue and white globe logo patrolled the streets. AT&T Emergency Grid Management. These were the corporate continuity planners, the engineers who had a protocol for this. They offered electricity and order, and the price was absolute obedience. We saw a man argue with one of the patrols about a food ration. The patrol leader did not raise his voice. He simply said, "Correcting system error," and 2 other men beat the man unconscious with efficient, impersonal blows. Felipe watched with a look of professional curiosity, seeing a new power structure to be navigated. I saw a machine that consumed people, a legal system given physical form. We found our chance in a rail yard on the far side of the town. A maintenance shed, unlocked, held a heavy workbench vise and a hacksaw. This was it, the end of our forced partnership. Felipe secured the chain in the vice's teeth while I took the saw. The screech of metal on metal was the loudest sound I had heard in weeks, a deafening noise that screamed our location to the world. We were halfway through the link when we heard the shouts. A patrol from the service was moving down the tracks, drawn by the sound. We ran. The saw was left behind on the shed floor. We scrambled over freight cars and ducked under coupling joints. Felipe created a diversion, throwing a loose piece of scrap metal against the side of a tanker car, drawing their attention to the right. It bought us a few seconds. We were trapped in a narrow corridor between 2 stationary trains when I saw a track-switching control panel. My father's voice echoed in my mind from the day he gave me my watch for graduating law school. Sapphire crystal, Vipa, tougher than a crowbar. "My watch!" I yelled to Felipe, holding out my cuffed wrist. "Smash the face into that panel!" He understood instantly. He grabbed my arm and swung it like a weapon. The crystal exploded against the plastic casing of the controls, and a shower of sparks erupted as the circuitry shorted. A loud clank echoed down the rails as the switch flipped. Far behind us, a train that had been slowly approaching suddenly veered onto the track between us and our pursuers, its massive bulk becoming a wall that blocked their path. We escaped, but as we looked back from the edge of the rail yard, a small drone hovered in the sky above the train. Its single red optical sensor was fixed directly on us. We were no longer anonymous survivors. We were a known error in the system. The drone forced us off the roads and into the wild. My topographical maps were our only guide as we pushed west toward Wyoming. To avoid patrols, we had to cut through a flooded marsh that the maps marked as treacherous. I was a marathon runner, and the endurance was in my bones, but Felipe was built for power, not distance. The thick mud sucked at his boots. He slipped and went down hard, pulling me with him into the cold, brown water. The fall ruined our small first aid kit, soaking the bandages and breaking the antiseptic vials. By nightfall, he was shivering. By morning, he had a fever. He stumbled constantly, his weight a deadening anchor on the chain. Every calculation told me to leave him. He was a liability, a drain on my dwindling resources. But I also calculated the odds of surviving alone if a service patrol found me. I needed him conscious. I needed him walking. I pulled him to his feet and forced him forward. Later, when we stopped, I broke my last energy bar in half and pushed a piece into his hand. It was a purely pragmatic decision, an investment in a necessary asset. But as he took it with a shaking hand, his fever-bright eyes met mine with a flicker of something I could not categorize. My own exhaustion led to the mistake. I misread a contour line on the map, leading us up a ridge that I thought was deserted. At the top, we walked directly into a checkpoint. It was built of concrete barriers and chain-link fences, lit by the glare of portable floodlights powered by a generator. It was disguised as a quarantine station, but the gray uniforms of the service told the truth. We were captured without a fight. They put us in a cage made of metal mesh. Felipe, even with the fever, tried to play his game. He called for the commander, a calm man in his 50s with a clean uniform. "I have information," Felipe said, his voice raspy. "Valuable information. A secure, off-grid location. Her plan." He nodded toward me. "I can help you. I just need a seat at the table." The commander looked at Felipe, then at me, his expression unchanged. "Assets are categorized by function," the commander said, his voice flat. "The female unit has demonstrated planning capabilities. The male unit has a strong build suitable for labor. Your individual motivations are a non-variable. There is no table." Felipe's face collapsed. His entire life's philosophy, the belief that everyone had a price and could be manipulated, was useless against a system that did not recognize him as a person. They saw only components. My worst fear was here. I was powerless, a victim in a cage, my future determined by a predator I could not outwit, just like my mother. We sat in the cage, waiting for transport. The chain between us felt heavier than ever. Felipe leaned his head against the cold metal mesh. "Sorry," he whispered, the sound barely audible over the generator. He looked at me, his usual arrogance gone, leaving only a hollowed-out exhaustion. When I was a kid, my family got a huge settlement from a chemical company. My father sued them himself. We were rich, and the money, the fight, it turned us all into monsters. Everyone was trying to get a bigger piece. It destroyed us." He closed his eyes. "You think the law is a shield to protect you. I learned it's just a club. The only rule is to be the one holding it, and here I am." I looked at the Wyoming map, a crumpled paper in my lap. "My father's ranch," I said, my voice low. "It isn't a guarantee. It's a contingency, a long shot. He's a stubborn old man. He might not even be there." It was the first time I had admitted the flaw in my own meticulous plan. A new contract formed between us in that silence, not of trust, but of shared reality. "My plan is a long shot," I said. "Your improvisation is reckless. But together, the probability of survival is fractionally higher than zero." He nodded, a simple final agreement. We were no longer just chained together. We were allied. I began to watch the guards. Their movements were rigid, predictable. They changed shifts every 2 hours, with a 30-second window where the gate was monitored by only one man whose attention was focused on the arriving patrol. It was a weakness in the system. I explained it to Felipe. He would provide the chaos. I would provide the timing. At the next shift change, as the new patrol rounded the corner, Felipe began to convulse. He thrashed against the chain, pulling me with him, his eyes rolling back in his head as foam flecked his lips. It was a masterful, terrifying performance. The lone guard's attention snapped to us, his procedure forgotten in the face of a medical emergency. He fumbled with the keys to the cage door. That was the moment I had planned for. As he swung the door open, I lunged, using the length of chain between us like a garrote. Felipe surged up, his seizure vanishing, and together we pulled the guard into the cage. We took his sidearm and the key to a vehicle parked just outside the perimeter. We were moving as one, my strategy and his actions synthesized into a single, desperate purpose. The stolen vehicle gave us 60 miles before the engine seized with a final grinding shriek. We abandoned it in a shallow ditch and continued on foot, using the jagged silhouette of the Bighorn Mountains as our guide. The FPA drone was gone, but we moved as if its red eye was still watching from the clouds, staying below ridgelines and using the sparse cover of pine and rock. Felipe's fever had broken, but it left him hollowed out, and he walked with a slow, deliberate pace that set my teeth on edge. Every delay was a risk I could not quantify, and my control over the situation felt like a handful of sand slipping through my fingers. We walked for 2 days, eating the last of the rations from the guard's pack and drinking filtered water from snowmelt streams that tasted of cold stone. We reached the final ridge as the sun was touching the western horizon, casting long, sharp shadows across the landscape. The wind was a constant pressure against my face, and it pulled at the torn remnants of my suit jacket. Below us, the valley opened up, a deep bowl of dark green pine and pale yellow grass. In its center was a single point of order in the wilderness: the ranch. I saw the geothermal greenhouse with its sturdy panels and the main house with a thin curl of smoke rising from its stone chimney. The perimeter fence was intact, and the livestock were moving in the corrals. My plan had worked. Everything I had sacrificed, everything I had done, had led me to this one defensible position on the board. Felipe stood beside me, his breathing heavy in the thin air. He looked down at the ranch, his dark eyes assessing it, not as a home, but as a fortress, a resource, an opportunity. The chain between us felt like the last problem to be solved. "So that's it," he said, his voice rough. "The promised land." I did not answer. I had found a place earlier, a deep, narrow crevice in a wide granite outcropping. The rock was old and brittle at the edges. I led him there and pointed. We could lay the chain across the gap and smash it with a heavy boulder. The impact would be loud, a ringing announcement of our presence for miles, but it was the only way. It was a final, desperate act of separation. He found a rock half the size of a man's chest and worked it loose from the dirt. I watched his shoulders strain as he lifted it, the muscles in his back bunching under his scavenged shirt. We positioned the middle link of the chain over the fissure in the granite. This was the moment. He would shatter the link, and we would be two separate people again, two independent variables. He could run for the ranch, or I could shoot him and walk down alone. I could run for the ranch, and he could try to follow. Every possibility was a betrayal. He held the boulder high, his knuckles white with effort, and his eyes met mine. A calm voice spoke from the trees behind us. "Independent variables are not permitted." We turned as one, the chain swinging between us. The FPA commander stepped out from behind a stand of pines, flanked by 4 soldiers in dark gray tactical gear. They moved with a quiet efficiency, their rifles already raised. They had tracked us relentlessly, a system correcting an error. "The asset will be integrated," the commander continued, his face showing no emotion. The ranch was their target, a known resource on their maps. We were just the final loose ends to be tied up before they claimed it. The soldiers advanced, and Felipe let the boulder fall to the ground with a heavy thud. There was no plan and no time for words. He lunged to the left and I went with him, the chain snapping taut between us. One soldier fired, and the shot kicked up dirt where we had been standing. We used the chain, a weapon we had been unknowingly training with for months. Felipe ducked low, and I swung my arm high, pulling the chain up like a tripwire. The lead soldier caught it across his shins and went down hard. Before he could recover, Felipe was on him, bringing a rock down on the man's helmeted head. We were a chaotic, 4-armed fighting entity that their rigid training could not predict. We moved through their formation, and the chain became a flail. I yanked hard, pulling Felipe's cuffed fist into the side of another soldier's head. He spun me around, and the momentum sent me crashing into the commander, knocking him off balance. It was ugly and desperate, a brawl of leverage and synchronized violence. The soldiers were trained to fight individuals, not a single lurching organism connected by iron. We incapacitated the commander and were turning on the last two soldiers when Felipe cried out. It was a sharp, guttural sound, and he collapsed, pulling me down with him. A dark red stain was spreading across his pant leg, high on his thigh. He was shot. I looked at the boulder at my feet. I could still do it. I could grab it, smash the chain in one frantic final effort, and run for the ranch. He was a liability now, wounded and useless. It was the only logical move, the culmination of my entire belief system. Self-reliance. Solitary control. I dropped the rock. Instead of breaking our bond, I used my body to shield Felipe, dragging him behind the granite outcropping. I pulled the stolen sidearm from my belt and fired at the remaining soldiers, the shots loud and clumsy in the cold air. They took cover. I hauled Felipe to his feet, his arms slung over my shoulders, his dead weight a terrible anchor. Together, we began a painful, hobbling retreat down the rocky slope toward the ranch. Every step sent a jolt of agony through my exhausted body, and the chain bit into my wrist with his swaying weight. We stumbled through the last 100 yards of open ground and arrived at the main gate. It was made of thick wood beams and reinforced with steel. A figure emerged from the house, leveling a shotgun. He was an old man, his face weathered and tough from a life of hard work. My father. He stared at the mangled pair of us, his eyes settling on the bleeding stranger attached to his daughter. "Vipa, who the hell is this?" Felipe leaned heavily against me, his face pale, but he managed a weak smile. He looked at my father. "I'm her associate." I looked at Felipe, then at my father, and gave a single, tired nod of confirmation. The words stayed in the cold mountain air, a perfect summation of our journey. We were not friends, and we were not lovers. We were a pragmatic, legally binding partnership forged in the ruins of the world we once fought to conquer.